fun stuff. Okay, so this week we're going to explore the texturing process for large objects inside of our scene. Hopefully over the last 7 days you've spent a lot of time creating a cool shape, a nice piece of geometry that's gonna turn out to be a really great blacksmith shop. In GCOM 402 we spend a lot of time talking about how to model buildings, so hopefully you kind of have extracted some stuff from that process. Here's the blacksmith shop that I created, okay? And I want to just kind of describe for you some of the thoughts and some of the ideas that I put into this project, and hopefully that will kind of encourage you to follow suit in a couple others. Okay, all 3D models should be done in passes, in phases, if you will, levels of detail. You never get it right on the first time, and you definitely want to make sure that you're infusing an opportunity to explore the shape and to work efficiently through our pipeline. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. I basically have 3 different versions. 3 different versions of my mesh. I have the layout version of my mesh, I have a rough pass, and then I'm ultimately going to have a higher resolution object that will allow me to extract some geometric detail through a baking system and also pump out some additional other goodies like normal maps and some finer detail pieces for the smaller chunks in the scene itself. Let me go to my layout stage, and as you can see, it's pretty basic. What am I trying to capture in the layout stage of any model? Rough shape, just the volume. Trying to figure out the dimensions of this bad boy, the spatial relationships between like the roof line and the walls and the ground and the doors. We want to try to describe our model with as few polygons as we possibly can. Because when it comes time to edit that shape and to edit that model, at this resolution and stage, it's wicked easy, right? I'm just moving a couple polygons around. I'm not worrying about creating a compliant mesh that's, technically perfect along every single stage. I'm not focusing on that right now. I'm just trying to understand the overall shape. For me, this took me about 20 minutes to make. Really fast, with basic primitive forms. I'm not going in and ensuring that everything is looped correctly and all the pieces are connected and everything is looking just hunky-dory. I'm not focusing on that one bit. If you look at the model here, on a technical level, there's some big problems. You can see up here at the roof line, the shape collapses down onto itself. And that's okay. At this stage and at this quality level, I'm good with that. I just move on. I'm not trying to make a perfect mesh yet. I'm just trying to see how this is all going to work. It's like a thumbnail sketch. If you've taken a traditional illustration class, the first thing that you do is do thumbnails, right? Very, very quick sketches and quick designs of what will ultimately be a more fleshed out design at the end of the day. We need to do the same thing in 3D. Shoot, the little cap that goes on my chimney isn't even on those little 4 pillars. I just threw it in real fast and kept going, right? It's not important at this stage of the game. So here's my layout. Very, very basic. In certain situations, some things are connected to each other. There's a lot of cross polygons. Things are penetrating through each other. You can see the inside section of a couple chunks of geometry poking through. I don't care at this moment. I'm just trying to capture what will ultimately be the overall form and shape of my object. All right. So once we've defined the outside dimensions and the volume that we're going to be playing within, then it's time to start working on the rough pass. And for me, the rough pass is in every sense the version of this model that's going to go in the game engine itself. And I haven't activated that mesh item. I have, however, turned the visibility of that item on, and you can see just with the black wireframes that there are some big differences between the layout version and the rough pass, or kind of like the medium quality version of this asset. I've bumped out some walls. I've added a tremendous amount of detail. I'm starting to describe some additional beams, windows, casings, things like that. I'm playing around with some other shapes on the back and just trying to see how all of these pieces are going to fit together in a more technically sound object. Pretty great. Let's go to the rough one real fast. And there's some big differences. If you look at the black wireframe now, you can see where the roof ended. We still want to be able to produce a mesh that's flexible. And the reason why, I had to bump my roof out a little bit to ensure that I had the proper overhang for some details that I added underneath it all. all of this stuff. And in order to get the structure that I needed for these polygons up in here and for these surfaces, I had to increase and change my roof line a little bit, make it a little bit larger and a little bit wider. If I could make one suggestion as you guys continue to work through your kind of experience in 3D modeling, is to not get committed and not get married, if you will, to your designs. These things are plastic. They're like like hunks of clay, on our board. We want to be able to push them around at every stage to refine the shape. Of course, unfortunately for us in the 3D world, we're going to have to commit at one point or another, right? That's kind of part of our thing. There comes a point where you have to say, this is it, this is the model, and go on from there. All right. So things are looking pretty good. And then at the end of the day, you'll want to make sure that you go in and start adding the illusion of higher resolution detail. Now, for me, the high-res stuff really comes in the form of individual planks. Okay, I've even started to give each one of these planks their own little character, which is kind of nice. Okay, planks are very rarely perfectly straight. They have little twists in them. Especially, I'm kind of going for the old English medieval fantasy style blacks in the shop. So adding some geometric character in there is going to help kind of sell the believability of this. These high-res polygons are perfect for a portfolio piece, and it also gives us an opportunity to extract some of this geometric information and bake it into a normal map or even a diffuse color map and continue working with it inside of our game art pipeline. We always get options by having this high resolution chunk of stuff inside of our scene file. We'll come back to this high-res stuff at the end of class today. I wanted to spend my time really discussing the asset that's going to go in the game engine itself. Let's start breaking this asset down a little bit, because you can see that there are a lot of moving parts and pieces, and there certainly is a lot of geometry if I just looked at all of it. It's about 2,300 polygons, and that's an appropriate number of polygons that are going to show up in our game engine. This is not too heavy a load, and it looks pretty good, right? What you don't see, however, are a lot of beveled and rounded edges. Often, where our meshes skyrocket in load and geometric depth is when we start adding like little radiuses, chamfered edges, and rounded edges. We don't want to do that. I'd much rather spend my budget, if you will, on describing my model in a greater sense of detail than having perfect rounded edges and what have you. Okay? Some of those extra rendering goodies can actually be done in-game with some really neat shaders in Unity and in other game engines. So with this model, I'm allowed to go in and have these individual boards here. Now, also note that I'm not trying to connect a lot of these pieces to each other. That would add to the geometric weight in all of this if everything was looped, okay? You can break polygons apart from each other. It actually makes it a whole lot easier to work, okay? The beams are a great example of that. If this was a model that I was going to throw, into a feature film, there'd be a lot of this stuff that I'd try to loop model and have it all be one connected piece. By separating them out into their own component pieces, I'm able to, keep the load pretty light. And even something on this, great example. I don't need all of these individual loops here. Those came from a previous operation. They're not needed for the asset that's going to go in the game. As is, if I was to double-click on this, 46 polygons. If I removed all of those edges, how many polygons would I have? 6. So I've gone from 46 to 6 by breaking it out and removing the chunks of geometry that's not needed. There we go. I'll unhide the rest of the mesh, and life is good. And it looks like I can also do it to this board down over here. Now I'm lightening the load. At the end of the day, when you're finished building your form, look for opportunities to remove some geometry, like I just have, that will lighten the geometric load of this mesh, but still retain the same shape and the same quality. All right, and things are looking pretty great, okay? Also, I have a duplicate chunk of geometry up here at the top. I'm going to have two windows in here, all right? I made one, and I UV mapped one, right? I didn't make two, I made one, and then I'm going to copy all the lovely window frame information to its neighbor next door. I don't need to have separate chunks quite yet. It makes UV mapping and texturing a whole lot easier. Because as you know from our past experiences, once we create a piece of geometry that we know is going to be duplicated, you should immediately UV map that bad boy. Because the moment you duplicate it, the UVs are going to follow. They're also going to be duplicated. Let me illustrate that idea so everyone kind of understands the concept that I'm working with here. I'm going to grab all these pieces, and there are a couple of them in there. There we go. Let's go over to the UV tab. Let's see, have I UV mapped these? I should have. There we go. So here's all the UVs for this chunk. There we go. Da-da-da! And you can see my little test pattern showing on my object down there, so life is good. If I unhide the rest of my stuff here, and I'll grab this and this, just so you guys can have a good sense. There we go. So there's those two little windows that pop out of the top of my house. Once I duplicate these chunks of geometry, okay, and I'm just going to do copy, paste, and move the duplicates, you can see immediately over there on the opposite side of my screen in my UV grid that the UVs also get duplicated. Everything went red, which represents that we have duplicate UVs sharing the exact same UV space. In order to get that kind of lined up, I'm just going to do it kind of visually. Right about there. That's close enough for me. Happy camper. And now I have the detail that I need without any new UV mapping being required. Yeah, go ahead.
When you do UVs, when you have like a lot of windows, is it all right for them to be on top of each other in the UV coordinates, or do you want them all to be separate?
It's a good question, and we're going to talk about the answer to that question here in a minute. Yeah, it's a really good question. Let's finish talking about geometry, then we'll jump into UVs. Okay. So as you're going through the geometric stage of defining all of these little chunks, look for areas of duplication, make one, UV map it, and then when you duplicate that object, all of those UVs are also going to get duplicated at the exact same time. And I have a lot of areas in here that have duplicated chunks of geometry, like all these boards. I made one board, did the UVs, duplicated it, cloned it a number of times, and bam, I'm on my way. Yeah?
Would it work with all of the duplication tools, like radial array?
Every single one. Every single one. The moment you duplicate geometry, shoot, it works with just straight up copy-paste. Yeah. The moment you duplicate a chunk of geometry, its UVs are also going to get duplicated. So use that as an opportunity to expedite your UVing process. I'll be honest with you, on objects that are like straight up duplicated, it'd be faster for you to do, if you haven't done the UVs first, trust me, it would be faster to duplicate all the boards, or excuse me, delete all your duplicate boards and UV map one and then reclone them. Like for example, if I hadn't UV mapped each one of these individually, okay, there's what, 6 of them there, okay? If I had just modeled them without having to think about UVing, now I have to go back in and UV map 6 boards. That's a lot of work, right? I would delete the boards. I'd delete 5 of the 6, UV map 1, and just reclone the darn thing. That's like 3 mouse clicks versus 40 mouse clicks, okay? It's just faster. It's just faster. Yeah. Make one, especially on areas that you know are going to be duplicates of each other. Shoot, I mean, this is, even for objects like these beams here, do you think I UV mapped every single one of these beams? No. I UV mapped one, right? I created one beam, I UV mapped that one beam, and then I just straight up duplicated these beams a bazillion times and just stretched them and moved their polys to get to the surfaces that I want, because I knew that every time I made a copy of it, the UVs were going to travel. Well, the geometry, you can change the size of it as much as you want. Yeah, so you'll have to go back in and adjust the size and proportions of your UVs, but that's a whole lot faster. You know, scaling UVs or moving certain points within your UV island up or down is a whole lot faster than having to re-UV it, you know. All right. Also, areas like openings and doors and windows, these are good little elements to have. We're not going to see a tremendous amount of information on the inside of the building, especially if we're at ground level. You know, for the majority of the time, the gamer is only really going to be influenced or influencing my object kind of at this perspective. So, you know, he's going to be looking at it, maybe not right quite down that low, maybe somewhere. So this is the perspective the user is going to have. So what is the most important part of my mesh here? Believe it or not. Do I care about how the roof looks? No, not really, right? Because chances are the gamer is probably never ever going to see the roof, or he'll see it only from a distance. So I don't need to put a lot of UV information and geometric information on the roof, okay? The underside, however, we're going to see a lot of stuff there. So that may be a good place to put some extra geometry, or at the very least to focus my texturing on, because I know my gamer is going to see those chunks at the end of the day. So I have an opening here. They'll see the opening, you know, having a window. As the gamer walks around, we'll see some parallax in there. We'll see a corner. It adds some realism, but I don't care about the inside. I'm not going to put furniture in there. Okay, if I need to have furniture in there, I'll put it in there. But that's a conversation that we can have later. The model is already structured to have additional game elements be placed on the inside. But for the most part, it's just a blank opening. Really not that fancy at all. Now, my mesh has a lot of opportunities to continue, or I have a lot of opportunities to continue to optimize my mesh. And I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. I have a lot of opportunities to continue to optimize my mesh. For example, these inside walls. I could certainly do a little bit more optimization in here. Right now, it's all one connected piece. Does it need to be a connected piece? No, not really. They don't. They don't have to be connected pieces at all. Okay. Like for example, this wall. I could simply just cut this, and then I'm going to paste it right back in on itself. Now it's a separate piece within inside the mesh. But check it out. I can delete that edge, and I can delete that edge, and now life is good. Okay. Same with some of these other walls. If I start ripping them out, I don't necessarily have to have them all connected with each other. Now, this is probably a bad example because I actually need these edges over here to go where they're going to retain quad polygons across that surface. But you can certainly start separating pieces out from one another to help you get the illusion that you're after. Like this corner over here is such a great example of that. I don't need it to look like that. Command X to cut, Command V. Now that it's its own shape, that can go, as can this and this. I've gone from 9 polygons to 1. Bam, reduced it. I've optimized my mesh, okay? I've optimized my mesh. Now, I no longer need that edge loop over there or that one over there, okay? Yeah. It'll still look perfect. There's a lot of places and a lot of chunks of geometry that we could very easily begin to reduce. Let's see, that one needs to stay as is. Down here at the bottom, check this action out. I mean, there's so much information down here at the bottom that I can strip out. The ceiling in here, I can make that one piece, and now I've gone from, 9 polygons, and I can go down to 1 pretty quickly. Same with the majority of the walls. 2 out of the 4 interior walls can be broken apart and their edge loops removed to get them down into a single polygon. This is the last step before we really start UV mapping, okay? It's to optimize our mesh, to get it down into like its fighting strength, if you will, before we send it over into our game engine. I would recommend, before you start optimizing and ripping your model apart and removing edge loops, to save a new version of your project file. That way, if something goes wrong, you always have a backup version that has everything connected. Because editing your shape is a whole lot easier when everything is connected and all contiguous, right? Shifting things vertically around your scene is simple. So do yourself a favor, save a new version, and then start optimizing it. It really does make a big deal. Okay. Questions on this little chunk of optimization. It'll help, trust me, it will help. And it will lighten the load significantly. Significantly. Okay. Like these windows in here, these backs. Do I need those to be like that? Nope. And get rid of that guy. Boom. And that guy. Boom. They're still quad polygons. The shape is still the same. Bam. I've gone from what? Having 4 polygons in each to 2. These little things go a long, long way. It allows you to have more in your budget to spend on. You know, more polys in your budget to spend to create other details. Now I can round all the edges, maybe, perhaps. Yeah. No, and that's kind of the idea. That's the the takeaway in all this is now we have some room to do what we want to do, right? By taking away in some areas, it gives us the opportunity to add in others, to add more detail where otherwise we wouldn't have. Pretty cool, huh? All right. So let's talk about the uncomfortable process of UV mapping this bad boy. And this is where it gets a little bit more of a challenge. In the past, when we've been doing set pieces, prop pieces, we've been trying to get all of our UV islands kind of captured in that positive UV quadrant, right? That's been the direction and the goal of almost every single project that we've worked on up until now. What is the big advantage, if you will, of trying to get all of our UV islands inside that positive UV quadrant? Why did we do that? So that nothing repeats. I like it. Okay, so we created a custom texture for our prop pieces, right? Go back to like your crate or your wine barrel. All the UV islands for those projects were sucked up into that upper right-hand quadrant of our UV grid. What else did that give us? You got it. So now we have one texture that will describe the surface information for the entire mesh. You got it. One texture, one mesh. I like that. Easy, simple. Great. What else does it give us? Let's see the direct benefit. Kind of goes hand in hand with the whole like one texture to one mesh object. We can now customize that texture to make that one object look incredibly unique. By jumping all this over into Photoshop, we can start painting detail and customizing the details of our texture to match the geometry. Only in an environment like Photoshop or other 3D painting softwares can you create that level of customization. So some big advantages, right? If you're working on a character or a prop piece like a car or like a crate or a wine barrel or a weapon, it makes sense that we localize all of our texture information to that one object, right? We want the weathering effects to look custom to that object. We want the details of our face to look custom to that character. However, in order to get the quality that we're after, we have to pack, or in order to get that level of customization, we have to pack all of those UVs into that upper right-hand quadrant, right? Yeah, exactly, right? When everything is packed inside that upper right-hand grid, upper right-hand quadrant in our UV grid, we're basically determining how many pixels. The size of the UV islands determine how many pixels are going to be needed to illustrate that chunk of information, right? If I got 200 or 300 separate UV islands that are all packed into my upper right-hand quadrant, how many pixels am I going to have to describe one of the walls? maybe like 9. Okay? It's going to look incredibly, incredibly blurry, right? You're not going to see any surface detail. Surface information is going to be gone. It's just going to look like you're squinting at your object. Everything's going to be so blurry because we just fundamentally don't have a lot of pixels to describe the texture information in big areas. So that packed UV workflow that we've been exploring over the last number of weeks is going the way of the dodo. On larger objects, like a building or a big set piece, we have to look at a multiple texture workflow to describe the details of our object. We're going to be working with tiling textures. Now, a tiling texture is pretty neat. Does anyone know what a tiling texture is? Yeah. A repeated texture. Now, are we going to see the seams where it repeats? Yeah. Not all textures are tileable. And if we could go to our tried and true friend, let's do this. CG textures. And I'm going to grab some roofing tiles here, and I'll use these. Notice that almost on, not on all of them, but there are a lot of them that have this little label down there that says it's tiled. Let's check it out. Let's just look at this one in particular. Here's the tiling one. A tiling texture is an image that will repeat both horizontally and vertically, and if you have a good one, you won't see a seam, a part of the texture where it's noticeably repeating. In CG textures, you have this really cool tiling preview, and now we can kind of get a sense of how that one image is being repeated both horizontally and vertically. Do you see a line, a transition, a seam in there? There's no seam. You are going to see patterns, of course, because it really is the exact same image going stamp, 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 both horizontally and vertically. So you are going to see some noticeable patterns. But you don't see any hard seam in there. You don't see any noticeable, transition between those two stamps. It's seamless. These are the tiling textures that we're trying to go for here. These are the tiling textures that are going to give us the best quality results. Because now, with these tiling textures at my disposal, I can apply one basic material to the entirety of my mesh, or maybe to a certain part, and tile it. We'll see this in action here in a minute. Great for large objects like building, like a building. For example, this building here, I have a 3D model somewhere on my laptop of this building. Okay, I'm not gonna, the UVs for this thing are pretty intense, right? There's a lot of nooks and crannies that describe the exterior of the Cosmo building, right? I can't pack all of those UV islands into their own respective positive UV quadrant and expect a pretty desirable result. Everything is going to look really, really, really fuzzy, okay? The tiling texture workflow allows us to get the quality we want and the flexibility that we need for our texture sets, okay? Instead of thinking about a texture, with the tiling texture workflow, the element that we need to focus the most on is the proportions of all of the UV islands to each other. In every sense, we're transitioning from a Photoshop-centric workflow over into a material-centric workflow, which is how Unity handles all of the application of these textures over in our game engine, right? So all of our tiling texture rates, if you will, are easily translatable to the material system over in Unity. Okay, and it's pretty neat, and I'll show you what that looks like when we get over into Unity. So we want to work with these tiling textures as much as we can. It gives us a lot of flexibility. Let me just go grab one. I'm not too enthralled with that looking one. Let's go back to roofing, and we'll do, I don't know, wood. Maybe the top of my object's going to have a really cool wood pattern. Like that. That's a good one. Let me download this one real fast. And I'm also going to go back and maybe I saw it under the roofing section a minute ago. Roofing inside. This may be a good place for us to have some really cool textures to represent the underside of my roof. let's see. Let me find one that's kind of fun. I'll just do this one for the time being. That'll do. All right, so I've downloaded some textures, and now we're ready to start rocking and rolling. So let's jump over into our UV environment and explore how we're going to work with all of these tiny textures. Now this is my UV map. Crazy, huh? You guys are probably all saying collectively, whoa, whoa, this is one big gobbledygook. And you're absolutely right. In a tiny texture workflow, the placement of our UVs inside of that positive UV quadrant is not important.
You want to create different materials for these different.
Yeah, the material is now the driver. The material that we create in our shader tree is going to be driving the application of this tiny texture onto our polygons. Now, let's just, let's start, I need one other one. Let me go back into CG textures. I also need kind of a cool, maybe cobbled stone texture that I can use to describe the details of my chimney. So let's go back to the root here, and let's see. I want it to be kind of stone. What could I use? Say again? Brick? Yeah, let's see what's in brick. See if there's anything in brick that'd be kind of fun. Medieval. This might be kind of cool. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, this one right here may be a really fun one to use for my chimney. That one or that one, this one looks a little bit more medieval. I'm just going to download that one, and we'll run with it. Okay. Let's do this real fast. And let me just hide Moto, and I'm going to just make my life a little bit easier. I'm going to rename some of these textures. So we'll call this roof tiles. Roof inside. And I'll call this chimney stone. All right. And then I've also brought in a couple others here that will help illustrate the idea. So this is going to be wood, rough, and brick 15. We'll just leave that one as is. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to work with all these. Let's jump back over into Moto, and I'm simply just going to very, very quickly import all these images into my scene here. So under the Images tab, I'll go to Add Clip, Load Image, and now I'm going to use my Finder window just to load all these images into the system. That way, I can start creating materials and applying these textures to their materials immediately. You want to try to get these tiling textures on your geometry as fast as you can. That way, you can gauge how well the proportions, the size of all of your UV islands are to each other. Let's start off simply by exploring the chimney, the forge part of my blacksmith shop here. I have some of its UVs already crafted. If you look at it, I can see them quite clearly. Let's work with this thing. They're all the UVs. Dun, 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 dun. Fantastic. So let's just throw this entire chunk here into its own material. The tiling texture workflow is almost 100% reliant on a material. From last week's conversation, we saw that our material is one of the few elements that will leave Moto and travel into Unity. So in every sense, what we're establishing right now is the material structure for our mesh over in Unity. In the past, when we were working with just one image, it wasn't that much of a big deal, right? Well, we're going to have probably 5 or 6 images now that are all going to be specifically associated with some very, very direct polygon groups inside of our scene. So I'm going to create a material, and I'm going to, oops, hit the wrong button. There we go. I'm just going to call this material chimney. Now be clear, be very direct. Don't have it be like 1, 2, untitled 1. Be very, very specific. This chunk is going to go over into Unity. You want to try to make it as easy for your production team in your game engine to decode the asset that you're creating, okay? So be very clear. This is the chimney. This is the material that's responsible for shading our chimney. with that said, let's jump over into our shader tree. And I already have some here created. Let's go over into our shader tree. There's my chimney material. And let's load in an image map. Add layer, image map. And I already loaded these images into my system. So I simply can use Clip Browser and choose the one that I want to work with, which in my case is this one. All right, rock and roll. Now, check it out. Things are looking good. Very pleased with the reproduction of the mesh that I have so far. Clearly, I didn't make UVs for all of these guys up in here, or did I? Don't remember. Nope, doesn't look like I have, but that's okay. Now, let's look at how this image is being wrapped around our object. We don't see any visible repeating edges in here on the texture itself, right? Do you guys see a transition at all? Like a blurry edge, or where the pattern goes kind of wonky at all? No, it's a good, tiny texture. However, the size and the proportion of the texture, or excuse me, the size and the proportion of the details within the texture, so the little rocks, if you will, doesn't necessarily look correct across the entire chimney. One of the great things about working with tiny textures is that we get to, instead of having to go over into Photoshop and monkey with the size of all this in Photoshop, I get to now do this all inside of Unity. Okay? Here's what I'm after. I'm after a result where maybe each one of these stones is a little bit smaller. Look at the way the stones are being created down here. Maybe not exactly what I want. The stones look a little too small down over here, right? A little too small. And they're way too big over here. So what do I need to do? How do I change this? How do I influence the size? Actually, we're not influencing the size of the texture, but we're influencing how that texture is placed on my geometry. Bingo. By increasing or decreasing the size of my UVs, I'm going to change how that texture is placed on my object, or how many times that texture is placed on my object. So let's fix the base of my chimney. Here are the UVs that describe the outside of my chimney, and I'm simply going to scale them up. Make them smaller, the image gets bigger. Make it larger, the image gets smaller. And that's pretty cool. Now I have a reproduction of the texture that kind of matches my vision for this. Now down here for this, the little hearth here that we have is a little bit too big. Yeah, there we go. Wonderful. And I may even want to describe that with a different material just to give it a little bit more visual separation between the base of my chimney and that hearth piece. It's kind of blending in too much at the moment. Question? Yeah. Same process. So we'll have to create a normal map of of my little brick texture here, okay, or a bump map, and then just load it into the material, just like any other material or any other image into that material. Let's illustrate this for Tomoko. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you guys a cool little trick. This is something that just popped up in the most recent version of Photoshop. It's pretty neat. I think Randall showed this to me last week. It's pretty neat. It'll automatically convert an image into a normal map. So let me do this. I'm going to save as. I don't want to, certainly don't want to influence or change my original document. Okay, I'll save it as a Photoshop document. All right, check it out. I'm going to make this thing black and white. Layer, and let's just do, or image, excuse me, we'll do hue saturation. We'll desaturate this thing. I'm also going to make it quite contrasty by doing a levels call, which is Command L. Yeah, now I have some very noticeable peaks, some very noticeable values, or some noticeable blacks in there. We have some middle gray values. Yeah, I'm going to adjust the gamma, the midpoint a little bit to bring some of those middle grades a little bit darker. and hit OK. So that, in every sense, is going to be my bump map. However, in a game world, we don't want bump maps, we want normal maps. And new inside of Photoshop, we can go and create a normal map from an image inside of Photoshop. It's just going to do an automatic conversion, very similar to what Unity is doing when we apply a bump map over there. It's under Filter, or excuse me, 3D, and then where is it from? I've forgotten already. Filter, no, it's Filter 3D, and then Generate Normal Map. There it is. Yeah. I don't know what kind of result that's going to give us. It may give us a bad result, but you know, at the very least, we have a place here where we can begin to control it. Perhaps I need to invert the image to get a different result. Let's try it now. Filter 3D, generate normal map, and I think that is maybe closer to what I want. Yeah, let's give that a go. Let's save it. I'm going to save as, and I'll save this out as a PNG. Since all this information is stemming from the exact same texture that I'm using to describe the diffuse value, I could very quickly load this in. Load, oops, missed. Load image, grab my normal. Of course, we don't want it to be placed as a diffuse color. If we go into surface shading and go normal, now we're getting the smallest illusion of surface relief, and things are looking pretty cool. Yeah, a little bit better at least. A little bit. It's a little too crunchy for me, a little too contrasty, but you know, it works nonetheless. Yeah, I think I also did my levels a little too intensely here. This is not the best way of creating a normal map, but it's an okay way of making it. It is a way. There are certainly better applications and better methods for getting the type of reproduction in our normals that we're after. Like, there's a really, really great application from a company called Algorithmic that's called Bitmap to Material that creates a number of different maps from a diffuse texture map that we have here. It's called Bitmap to Material. It's great. Check it out. It's really neat. All right. So now, if you look at it, now I have two images that are influencing all the polygons that are associated with my chimney material. If I wanted to make a change to how these images are showing up, I don't have to go in and do anything to the material because the material is just applying a texture. Changing the size of my UVs is going to get me the result that I want. Check it out. Let me zoom in. Now, if I wanted to, maybe my art director came in and said, Pat, what you're doing, this is neat. However, you know, I'm really not digging the size of each one of these bricks. You know, it'd be much better. Excuse me, it'd be much better if the bricks were a little bit bigger. I can go, yes, sir, or ma'am, no problem. Let me just change the size of my UVs here, and now I can make them smaller. The material is now responsible for placing the image, not the UVs. Okay? The size and scale of the UV islands inside of our UV workspace is critical to determining how big or small the details within that texture are going to be placed on the geometry when the material is active. Kind of make sense so far? Let me show you another example of this. Let's go in and start flushing out maybe like the roof. All right, let me make sure that, yeah, okay, great. So all the materials that need to be in the, I've already made the connection between the polygons for these and my material. So nothing magical here, just selecting polygons, hitting M, applying it as a new material. Life is good. Let's get some of these, and I'm going to isolate by hiding everything but. Okay, here we go. Let's throw in an image map. I'll use one of the images in my clip browser. There we go. All right, now let's look a little bit more critical at these polygons, okay, at the geometry that I'm working with. What can you tell me about how the image is being placed on my geometry? Visually, what's it look like? A mess. Elwin, specifically, why is your brain saying it looks like a mess? So we have some issues around the front, right? Around the borders. So I think, Elwin, this is what you're talking about, right? That right there doesn't necessarily look very real, right? What about the size of my roofing tiles? Are they too big or too small? They're too big, right? They're way, way too big. These are massive roof tiles. If this was the roof, if this was an actual roof, each one of those tiles would be like 3 feet wide by like 8 feet tall. They'd be gigantic, okay? So we need to change the size of my UVs to influence how all of this information, how all of this texture information is showing up on my geometry. Let's see, where are they? There it is. It's way off down over here. There's one side and there's another. Start scaling these things down a little bit here and seeing, well, we can see I'm going the wrong way. And now we can kind of audition. I think I've gone a little bit too far here. Now I can start working and trying to figure out how big I want all these roofing tiles to be as they travel around my mesh. Yeah, very pleased with that. That's starting to look pretty good. However, all of this stuff in here, not so hot, right? Not so hot at all. We might need a different material to describe the border edges of this chunk of geometry, okay? This may be one of those elements that we'll have to go in and craft with a custom tiling texture over in Photoshop. Okay, so things are looking pretty fantastic. Now the underside of the roof we have some issues with. I don't want my roofing tiles to show up on the underside. That would be, for a lack of a better word, a bad idea. Also, if you look on the outside, we have some sins that we need to rectify as well. What would be the big problem here? Specifically, look at the ridge line. Tiles aren't going to be that small, right? If you look very carefully, we have little itty-bitty planks that are showing up at the ridge line itself, right in here. You see all this? We're absolutely going to see that, so I need to make a change. I need to make a change to how my UVs are placed within my scene to get a more compelling illusion. This is another great thing about the tiling texture workflow, is that we're not locked to the placement of our UV islands as we were when we were entirely doing our texturing in Photoshop, right? We're not locked into it now, which is fantastic. If I changed my UVs and the placement of those UVs within inside that positive grid last week, I would have to retexture everything, right? Because the coloring book that I created is now not going to match the custom texture that I painted inside of Photoshop. With the tiling texture workflow, I can continue to craft the placement of all of this stuff by moving these things around. Check it out. I can move them down. And there we go. Life is good. Ta-da! Happy with that. A 2-second change has increased the quality of my model tenfold. All right. I think I'm just going to create some I think I'm going to reapply these polygons in here to a new material. And I'll call this roof under. Okay. And let's throw a tiling texture in here as well. Aha, great. Fantastic. Really kind of nice. Let's change how we want all this stuff to show up. Now, let's talk strategy here for a minute. If you look at the way I've designed my UVs, here's one side of the roof, front, the top, and the bottoms, all as one contiguous UV island, and here's the other side. So I can't necessarily go in at the moment and start to shift this stuff around. I can't make just this one side smaller without having to tear off these UVs from their parent, right? I want the underside to be a lot smaller, and I mean a lot smaller here. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to move this around till those beams roughly match up. Maybe like that. That's kind of neat. This one I can also move left and right, maybe just a smidge. Yeah, now it's kind of matching up, but it's still kind of not. But the beams on the inside, way too big, right? I need to make them smaller. How am I going to make the image appear smaller without making the UVs larger or smaller. And change what? Yeah, the time parameters. And what that looks like, it's called horizontal and vertical wrap. So I have my image selected, and if I go into my texture locator, which is fundamentally responsible for placing this texture on my model, of course we're going to use UV map. I'm using the forged parts UV, but this horizontal and vertical wrap is the value that's responsible for determining how many times this image is tiled within one quadrant of my UV space. At a default value of 1, this is the result that we saw a moment ago, is pretty consistent. If I was to increase this to like 2 by 2, now I'm repeating this image 2 times within the same space, and it kind of giving us the appearance of much smaller details within the image itself. This is a value that translates over into our material setup in Unity. If you remember from last week, we looked at a material, okay? And there's a diffuse color place, or a place for us to drag and drop our diffuse color image map into. There's also an offset value for that image map, and then most importantly, there was a tiling value along the X in the V, along the U and the V axis. The horizontal wrap value is that tiling value over in Unity. So if we change it here, we can absolutely change it over in Unity as well. And let's just play with this. I think 2 is too big. Maybe somewhere right around 1.6, 1.7. That's pretty great. All right, now we're getting there. Let's see if we can match the patterns here a little bit. Another small detail in the texture itself, I got a beam here. I want that beam to be resting right on that foreground edge. Let's see what that does. Yeah, that makes sense. Best case scenario, I had a beam here and a beam here. But all I really care about is the front, as a lot of this other stuff is going to be occluded by the rest of my mesh. Let's grab this one, see what we can do. Yeah, that's close enough for me. I'm happy with that. However, I'm going to, I think, just move this one up and down a little bit. See if I can get one of those beams kind of resting on the ridge as well. Oops, not quite there yet. Yeah, there we go. See what that looks like from a distance. Hey, that's actually not too bad. That's actually not too bad. These front ones will have to change, but I think for the time being, this is beginning to look a little bit more consistent. I'm liking the way this is flushing out. These over here? Well, yeah, that's the idea. That's the idea. Now this one clearly a little bit different, right? It still has the exact same image, and we want to use this one roof image to describe all the roofs on our object, right? There's going to be a consistent roof texture across all these chunks, but we have some larger issues at hand here, right? The size of this roof and the reproduction of that texture on these polygons does not match the other roofs, okay? So let's get this working the way we want it to work. I think I just need to make this thing gigantor. Oops, going the wrong way, excuse me. Until they're roughly the same size. And I'm just doing this to eye now. The best way to do this would be with a checker pattern, because the scale of the checker pattern is a little bit more consistent. We can see some discrepancies a little bit easier, but I think I'm close. I'm in the bubble, as they say. All right, looking good over here, right? However, on this side of the roof, what's happening to my tiny texture? It's upside down. It's upside down, okay? So you got to use your eyeballs. You got to use your eyeballs. Tiny textures are great, but you got to use your eyeballs to see precisely how that texture is going to be placed on our object. What is the solution? Yeah, all of these guys in here, I'm just going to rotate them. All right, and I want to tear them off. Go to the Move tool, hit Tear Off. And now I can split them from their scene. I'm not going to change their size or scale. Let's see if I can let me sew these together. There we go. And now I can rotate it 180 degrees. There we go. Great. Can put those back in with its friends, and life is good. Still looks a little bit bigger than it needs to be in comparison to the others. There we go. Ta-da! Life is good. I'm happy with this. We can move on. All right. So you'd basically follow this entire practice, going all the way around your model, creating a whole series of materials that we can define the basic texture set of our object. Okay. I wanted to spend a minute, or would it be better to take a break right now? I've been yakking for almost 2 hours straight. Take a break? You guys want to take a break? Yes? No? You guys are looking at me blankly like you don't care. Break. Let's take a break. Ready? Break. Be back at 3 o'clock, please. Okay. All right, so let's jump in and continue working on our model here, because we're doing some really great things with our textures, but I wanted to spend some time really focusing on the wood beams. The wood beams present us with a unique challenge, and it forces us to have a very high attention to detail in certain areas of our mesh. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. I brought in a lovely tiling wood texture that's going to do a really great job of working with our wood beams, and I think just initially I'll grab some of these guys over in here. There we go. Here's all my UVs. Awesome. Looking very nice. Very nice. And let me just roll into my material here and start loading in that tiling texture that I brought with me today. So I'll go Image Map, use Clip Browser, and there it is. All right. Now, let's look at what we see here. Some interesting results. I can immediately see off the top of my head that we have some size issues that we need to capture. So I could absolutely scale these elements up and down. Yeah, there we go. Now we're getting a much finer reproduction of the texture across our mesh, and I'm actually not too in love with this one. Let's go see if we can find another one. This one is not the one I thought I was going to be working with today. So there it is. There's the wood beam texture, and I think actually, as I look at it in Modo, I think a lot of the details are getting washed out. Let me import in another one from CG Texture that has a little bit, I think, more obvious kind of pattern here. And let's see, I gotta remember where I found it. I think it was in rough. Yeah, here we go. Let's just do this one. This one's kind of fun. Let's download that one, bring it into our system, and I'll simply replace that one texture inside of Unity, or inside of Modo, excuse me. I'll load this image map in. Go. Aha, there we go. Now it's really, really obvious as to how all of these wood grain patterns are being influenced on our mesh. Okay. Now, when you're working with wood grain, it's very, very important when you're working with polygons that are being described as wood, it's very important to ensure that the grain direction on each one of these elements is going the direction that you need it to go in, okay? This is actually a really important issue that a lot of folks tend to overlook. If you analyze the structure here, we can see the inherent direction of each one of these patterns. Check it out. You can see that it's flowing this way, and then I have a beam down here where it's flowing vertically, and if you look, we're creating the illusion of an actual kind of wood beam structure here solely based on the pattern of the texture on the object itself. Aha! This is great, right? This is absolutely fantastic, because now our subconscious is filling in the blanks, and it's beginning to look like an actual, kind of structure, which is kind of neat. If you don't pay attention to this, you're going to run the risk of having some of your elements go in the direction you don't want them to go. Let me see. I've done a really great job here on all of mine. All of my patterns are flowing the way they need to flow. Let's look at other areas. Other areas within inside my scene, and let's see if I've done as good of a job. And I certainly, in some areas here, everything is looking okay for the most part. Aha! Here's one. I knew I had a couple that I hadn't done a great job on. Let's look at these. Okay, so there's the UVs. Yeah. Look at the way the pattern is showing up on these portions of the UVs. Okay? You can clearly see the grain is going in the opposite direction. The grain is flowing vertically, yet I'm working with a board that is horizontal. Luckily for us, inside of our tiny texture pattern, or a pipeline here, simply rotating the board by 90 degrees will get the grain flowing in the appropriate direction. Another thing that we have to think about and consider is the size of the wood grain on the object that we're placing it within. I think for a lot of these, the size of the wood grain is just way too big. So if I start to scale this into the direct, yeah, see, that looks a little bit more believable given the size of the polygons that this texture is being placed within. I might even go a little bit further on those larger structures, because on smaller boards, the wood grain pattern would be, in fact, smaller. This is a great thing about the tile texture workflow that we're participating within. Okay, we can make changes quickly to how our textures are showing up on our mesh without having to go back into Photoshop. Right? We're kind of freeing ourselves from the shackles of Photoshop and the coloring books that we created with those dedicated UV maps. Yeah, and it allows us to customize this pretty quickly, like these in here. I think all of these, the wood grain pattern is probably not where I want them to be, and I won't do all of them. I'll just do a couple of them. Okay. I think for some of these, maybe all of them, it should be a little bit bigger. There we go. Yeah. Fantastic. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Now, one other thing that you'll want to make sure you capture, especially in areas... Yeah, John, go ahead. I apologize.
I just want to ask, this is like a method that can kind of, that you can do for this sort of project instead of having to put everything in Photoshop.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to avoid, right? We don't want to send anything over to Photoshop now. We want to take these tiny textures that we either create or find online and apply it to our models. Now, one other element that you'll definitely want to make sure you kind of take a look at, especially on wood beams like this, are the caps. If this is a wood beam, would we have a cap that looked like that down there? Probably not, right? Probably not. What would it look like? It'd look like ends, right? Circles. Yes, you're absolutely right. Like this. Okay. Maybe something like that. Okay. Or like that. That's a great image that we could use for all of our patterns here. So let me just use. I think I'm going to use this one. And I'll just download the medium, this low quality one, real fast, and then I'll bring it into Unity or Modo. Excuse me. So let me create a new material here. I'll call this wood beam ends. There we go. I'll load that image map in. All right. And now for that one material, let's see if we can find it. Okay. We're going to disconnect it. I'm going to move it. I'm going to tear it off. Okay. And now I can scale this thing however big or small I want it to be to get the illusion that I'm after. Now, this isn't a tile texture, and I've gone too far here. Yeah, but already that's starting to look a little bit more believable. Clearly, I have some quality issues in here with my textures and some color issues, but these are the types of considerations that we need to think about as we start to flesh out the details of all these individual pieces. Having a noticeable end grain pattern on our beams really helps sell the believability of that object. Yeah, that helps, especially when you get up close, okay? Because you'll see that pattern for sure. That's an end beam. Let's see, this one over here, that doesn't get it, but this one should. That one should. That polygon right there should be associated with my wood end, so I'll apply it to my wood ends. And I'm going to tear off that UV. And yeah, there we go. That'll work. The colors are off, so you'll want to kind of adjust the colors to kind of get them in line with the other textures. But these are the types of things that we need to consider and conceptualize as we're going through the texturing process. Okay? Tiling textures frees us of a lot of issues that we've been working against over in Photoshop. For big objects like a building, this is the workflow that we have to manage. Now, what aren't we seeing here? What aren't we gaining? Huh? Bumps? I can add a bump map into there pretty quickly. Think about how you modeled some of the other props, the science fiction panel, the blacksmith shop sign that you guys textured, the crate. What? Yeah, customization, right? We're not being able to go in and bake like all that lovely ambient occlusion data. We're not being able to go in and create custom weathering with this system in tow, right? This is a great way for us to block out the overall textures and then rely almost exclusively on the power of our rendering engine to fill in the blanks for us, to get all of those other details. Our rendering engines and our game engines are getting so strong that we're going to rely along their global illumination system to get the soft shadows. We can rely upon their advanced rendering techniques to get some of the illusions that we were used to achieve, to be able to achieve with our Photoshop stuff. Okay. Different tools now. For smaller objects, dedicated textures that we craft almost exclusively in Photoshop. On larger objects like buildings, we want to start using the tiny texture workflow to get us where we're going to need to be. Okay. Questions so far? Everyone's good. Everyone understands my kung fu. Yeah?
One question might be sensitive, but when you're putting the UV islands and they overlap each other,
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter because the material is driving the placement of that part of the image on the polygon. My wood beams are such a great example of that, right? My wood beams are all in pretty much the exact same spot within inside of my scene. The material is placing that texture almost on a per UV island basis. It doesn't matter that they're overlapped now. So you can have one big garbly-gook thing here in the center. It doesn't really matter. I know some folks, they get a little bit more disciplined, and to a certain degree, I've kind of have done that. Here's some beams over here. I've separated out, certain areas away from the pack, if you will, to make it a little bit easier to work with. But you certainly can have them all chunked into the center like that, and continue working. All right. Let's really quickly, inside of my walls, I'm just going to add one more image map. I'll add that brick pattern in. There we go. And brick patterns are such an excellent, excellent test if our textures are being tiled correctly. It's almost kind of like a grid, right? The bricks are all the same size. Our brick building that they're building next to us is such a great example of that. From the floor all the way up to the roof, each one of those bricks is a defined size, right? At no point in that building are any of the bricks on the exterior facade larger or smaller than the other bricks. Brick patterns are a great way for us to test the system and ensure that what we have created is compliant. And I can immediately see that the walls in here are a different size. I need to make these a little bit smaller. I'm going to unhide here. And I'm just kind of doing this visually. And that's pretty close. The bricks up on this side. Are of different size and scale. These need to be made bigger to match the friends that are right next to them. Much bigger. There we go. That's pretty close. There's some tweaking in there that I need to perform. But at least now it's more consistent, and I need to do the same for other parts and pieces. And I'm on my way. Yeah, looking good. I'm happy with that. And the brick, I need to go in and make some adjustments and continue refining the shape. But this is the process that we need to go through. And within a couple mouse clicks, man, we have something that's beginning to look pretty fantastic. And I'm very pleased with the results that I'm getting. Now, let's talk for a second about how we're going to get all of this stuff out. Hopefully, you've heeded my requests, and you've done a good job at naming all of the materials inside of your shader tree. Okay? This information is going to travel with us over into Unity. Okay? And let me show you, there's some nuances in here that we need to continue to manage, some quirks. So let's continue to examine how Unity is going to handle all the materials, because now it's critically important that all of these materials make sense over in Unity. In the past, with like the crate or the wine barrel or the smaller objects, it really didn't matter because we only had one texture being applied to all the polygons on our model. Now, I have what? 6 or 7 different textures that are influencing the reproduction of the texture information on my model. So I need to be careful, and I need to understand the pipeline between the two applications. Let's check it out. All right, so first things first, let's get all this information out of Modo and into Unity. The first thing that you'll want to do is just kind of triple check your scale. This is something that I've just kind of gotten accustomed to doing from time to time. I'm going to go in and just create just a unit primitive cube. We know really pretty quickly over inside of Unity that a unit primitive cube here in Modo matches the unit primitive cube over inside of Unity. Okay? These are good measuring blocks. Okay? Often determining the size and scale of each one of our models can be a little bit of a challenge. We have a point of comparison now, a reference, if you will, between the two applications that gives us a good understanding of the scale that we need to adopt. Okay? Excuse me. Let's jump over into Unity and see how we can work with the scale. We're going to create basically a little measuring stick for us. Okay? So I want to fire open Unity. I'm going to create just a very, very, very simple test environment to illustrate this concept. So I want to create a new project, put it right on my desktop and call this demo. Hit save, and I'll load the character controller package into my project as the application loads. All right. So let's just do it real fast. Let's just add a simple plane. There we go. Let's also add one of our cubes. There we go. And I want to translate this thing up about a unit on the Y. So now my cube should be resting not on my floor. Or I need to do it 0.5, excuse me, 0.5. And now it's resting on my floor precisely. I'm also going to add a directional light so we can see what in the world's going on. And FYI, if you're really, really tired of seeing the grid, like I hate the grid in Unity, go up to your Gizmos pull-down menu and just do Show Grid. Now we don't have to see its madness. Okay? Inside my standard assets folder, of course we have our character controllers, and there's my first-person controller. I want to add that into my scene. And I want to put this in my world. And let's do this. I'm going to rotate my view around. So I'm basically looking at my block. Okay. While I'm here, I'm going to grab my floor and just make it bigger so I have a larger playground to work with. I'm also going to create a new material, call it red, just to break out some of this information with some color. When everything is white, it's often, there we go, it's often very difficult to get a really good understanding of how all these things separate. All right, so let's look at how our sense of scale is working inside of our game. Let me find, oops, I fell through my environment. Let me raise it up some. There we go. There we go. All right, so there's my cube. I know that the cube in Unity matches the unit primitive cube over in Modo. I want to use this as a measuring stick. I want to kind of see how big I need to make a doorway inside of Unity so that the doors in my model over in Modo are roughly the same size, right? Because I want to export my geometry from Modo, perfectly, okay? So let's figure this out. Let's do some math. Let's do some deductive reasoning, and I'm going to force you guys to think on our Wednesday afternoon, so I apologize, okay? Let's see if we can figure this out. How big do we need to have a stack of cubes in order for me to walk through my doorway correctly? I don't know. Let's visually determine it. I'm not going to figure it out. I'm going to let my thinking machine, aka my computer, do the heavy lifting for me. Okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I want to duplicate that cube. Control D or Command D duplicates an object, and then power user trick of the day. I want to snap that cube up I want to move it precisely up the same height as the cube below it. Well, if you hold down the V key, you'll be able to do some vertex snapping. And notice that as I'm holding down the V key, the translate handles are moving to a vert. Now I can click and drag, and it's going to snap the movement of that cube to any vert. I'll duplicate that one again, drag it up, grab the V key once more, that way. Now, it's either going to be 3 or 4. I think it's going to be 4. Let's test this, and I'm basically going to create a little bridge. Okay, and then I'll do a couple this way. I'm basically going to create an opening, if you will. There we go. So how big do I have to have all of these elements to be inside of my scene in order for me to get the appropriate scale? I want to make my lives a little bit easier now. I want to duplicate all 4 of those simultaneously and then vertex snap them together as a group right there. Okay, let's see how that plays. Is it too big? Is it too small? The only way to know for sure is to look at it in Engine. That looks, okay, I can walk under it, okay? However, if I jump, I'm going to hit my head in the threshold of the door. Bonk, 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 okay? So maybe a 4 cube height, or maybe a 5 cube height for my doorways is a little bit better for me to work with, right? There is, but the system's the same. The system's the same, okay? Well, can't you see that from the game view down here? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to take these guys. I want to move them up. And then I'm also going to, take these guys, duplicate them, move them up, and I'll do a little vertex snapping again. Boom. Grab these guys. Do a little vertex snapping. Oops, grabbed the wrong one. There we go. Let's test the 5 cube height. See, now this feels a little bit better, right? It's a little bit big, but that's okay because I can still jump and go through it. This is the illusion of game design. It really is. We have to make sure that it's not, if I was an architectural firm, yeah, that door is way too big. It's not the standard size. But this is not an architectural firm, right? We're not trying to create a one-to-one creation of the darn thing. We're trying to create a creation that works in Engine. Okay. When I worked in San Francisco, I worked with a lot of game companies on their models, right? And I remember vividly getting a whole bunch of assets from the Jade Empire games. Do you guys remember those games? Yeah, those are cool games, right? Yeah, good stuff. This is myself. This goes back like PS2 times. And I was working with one of the characters that came from the Jade Empire crew, and I noticed pretty quickly that the proportions of their characters were all wrong. They were completely backwards from the proportions of a standard character, right? And I asked the artist that, man, it's like, why are the arms so long? And your hands are ginormous. Proportions are off, right? Got like big like monkey arms and hands that are twice the size they need to be. And he's like, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. But given the camera angle of our characters, right, we needed their arms to be longer so they can hold the weapons, right? And in order to see the hands on the weapons, we had to make them larger, right? In the entertainment world, the way we approach modeling is different than how we get it from the game world, because at the end of the day, it's got to work in-game, right? We need to make adjustments to our assets to ensure that those assets look correctly in Engine, okay? So don't get hung up with the fact, oh, it doesn't look real. It's the mentality that we need to approach is, does it look correct in-game? Does it look real in the game? Yeah, this is totally a function thing. It's totally a function thing. And it's a starting point. It's a starting point for scale. Now I've defined with my basic measuring sticks how tall doors needs to be. It basically needs to be 1, 2, excuse me, hold on a second. I think I grabbed the directional light. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cube heights. Or actually, In all honesty, it needs to be 4 cube heights. The 5th one will define the horizontal height. Yeah.
Well, could you just scale it in game, or is it better to do it in Modo?
It's better to do it in Modo, right? We want to try to do as little scaling as we can in Engine. Because remember, think about this. What if you're making an entire town, right? What if you're making an entire town? I can't have the buildings, because I want to have maybe like 4 or 5 different model files for each different building. Each building is going to get their own model file. Well, if one model file, the buildings will be big, and the next model file, the buildings will be small. Now we have an inconsistent art production pipeline. We know the size based on the unit system inside of Unity. We're going to use this as our measuring stick inside of Modo. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. For the game world, it doesn't understand inches. Games don't understand inches, millimeters, feet, or miles. It understands ones and zeros. It's units, right? What we're defining here is not a defined height, that this thing is 1 meter tall by 1 meter. We're saying it's 1 cube height. Earlier, last week, we very quickly discovered that a unit primitive cube in Unity matches the exact same size as a unit primitive cube inside of Modo. I've now defined in Unity that if I stack 4 cubes, that's the appropriate height that I need for all of my doors in Engine. I'm going to take that exact same idea over into Modo and use that as a measuring stick for my door.
So would you say that I kind of wasted my time and energy by going through the time of modeling it in a meter so that it would snap over?
It's never a waste of time to model things in the appropriate scale. You're giving yourself the most flexibility.
But that was the appropriate scale, I guess. In meters, 1-to-1.
Depending on your modeling package, how it exports all of your geometry is specific to that modeling package. The scale factor. The scale factor. What we're trying to determine and what we're trying to do is that we're trying to create an art pipeline that doesn't require us to go in on every single model and change that scale factor. I just want to be able to send it in, kind of a fire and forget. I know the unit of measurement now. I know the height of all of my doorways, and I can very easily, in Modo, scale things up and down to match that height. We're just trying to make it easy. The kind of thing for all construction, you want to use points of reference. Once you start once you start infusing a lot of measurements, you're making it more complex than it probably needs to be. Try to find simple solutions to complex problems. This is a very simple solution to our scale issue. Just a measuring stick. We just made a measuring stick. That's all we've done.
Yeah, I tried to make like a human scale reference, calculate it out.
Yeah. Simple solutions. Simple solutions. So I'm basically just going to copy and paste this thing. And I'll turn on my snapping engine as well. And I'll get things to snap the way I want to. Copy, paste. Now we're close to snapped, if not, nope, looks like it's not snapping at the moment. So let me get my snap parameters the way I want them to be. Snapping a vertex. We'll do polygon center. No, that's not going to get me what I want. Here, you know what I should have done? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to duplicate the item. Now I can move this up with a little bit more accuracy. Of course, I didn't move them in item mode. Thinking way too hard about it. I'm sorry, say again? Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, that would work, for sure. Yeah. Scale it, right, you got it. And I'm just going to eyeball it, because clearly I have something not enabled on my snap that's giving me what I want to do quickly here. And it's still snapping, oddly enough. This is a bug. Yeah. Here, let's just do this. I'm just going to do it by eye. Whoa, that's fun, isn't it? Yeah, that's fascinating to me. That is a bug. My snap engine is off, and yet it is still snapping. All right, let's just go turn all of it off. Yeah. No, it is, okay. And I'll just eyeball it. If I'm off by a millimeter, not the end of the world. Point of reference, that's all we're trying to do. Okay, so there, or that right there, those those 4 cubes, excuse me, those 4 cubes represent the height of my doorway. So what can we see very quickly and instantly here about what we need to do to my forge? It needs to be way bigger. It's way too small, right? It's way too small, okay? It's super, super tiny. You got it. It's incredibly tiny. So let's just scale it up. Where should I scale it up from? The origin, right, yeah. So let's just do it real fast. Since everything is encapsulated on one object, really, really simple, easy, edit to make. Origin, let's turn snapping off. Scale this bad boy up uniformly. And I'll even turn on wireframes here so I can see how I'm doing. Yeah, and roughly, I think maybe right about there-ish. Yeah, that'll do. I have a curved doorway here, so as long as I have a little bit of a gap here, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. But now I know, beyond any reasonable doubt, that when I send this object over into Unity, I'll be able to walk right in, if this doorway was open, and the scale factor doesn't need to be explored at all. Okay. All right, so let's send this over to Unity and get this, now that we've scaled it, let's send it. Yeah?
When you're importing models, shouldn't you use different models for the collision detection?
We're going to talk about that in a future class, but to answer your question, absolutely. Absolutely. Like I said, we're going to talk about that in a future class. So if you want to explore that, I'd say go do it on your own. We're not going to get into that today at all. Soon. All right, I want to export this out as Clauda. And as a reminder, make sure that just layer is still on, okay? Just layers. That way you won't export the camera and the light and some other stuff. Just the layer that I've worked on. We'll hit OK. And let's just call this Forge. I'll put it right on my desktop. There we go. Life is good. Let's go back over into Unity. I don't need all these cubes anymore. Oops, looks like I had a couple directional lights in there. I don't need that main camera anymore. And I accidentally deleted my plane. Let's put that back in. A little bit bigger, and I'm also going to put it at the origin of my scene. Go. So now life is good. Let's import in that asset, my Forge asset. Right-click, import new asset. There it is. Import it in. Aha! Yeah, awesome. All right. So, check it out. One of the things, importing the geometry, super easy. Yeah, Ree, what's up?
How it has the option to import lights. Is it better to make the lighting in like your whole environment in Modo or to do it in Unity?
What would you gain by doing it over in Modo? Yeah. Those light objects aren't going to translate. You could send a locator if you needed lights in very specific locations. You certainly could create a locator. Like I've done that before with sconces on a wall. Having a whole bunch of or having a whole bunch of lamps on a wall, and I wanted to have a point light specifically in the center of each one of those. So you can create a locator, that represents the position of your light, and then send all that stuff over into Unity. But the actual direct illuminators, those are Unity-specific things. Yeah. I export it as a Collada file. Collada, FBX, and OBJ are the files that you want to generally hang out in. Okay. So let's check out some of these options for materials, because this is really an important facet. All the other stuff, we'll talk about that in the future, but the materials section is really, really important. And of course, we're going to want to import in all of our materials. Yay, it makes sense. Okay. However, let's look at the structure for naming our materials. And this is the really important bit. Okay. Right now, the option is by base texture name. By base texture name. And we're going to compare and contrast a few of the options that are in this pull-down list. Okay. Because we have by base texture name, from models material, and then model name from plus material name. Okay, or excuse me, this is going to determine how the model or how the materials in Unity are going to be called. Okay, let's do by base texture name and see what we get, and then we'll do from models material name and see what we get. All right, and everything looks good. I didn't make any changes, so I don't have to apply anything. If you look at the materials, yeah, great. Here's our chimney, here's default, here's roof under. All the stuff has come in just the way we want. Default this is the base shader, okay? So this is kind of a throwaway. If I wanted to eliminate this material, you could try to delete it. Can't undo this action. Oh, it actually works now. In the past, it used to not work. Let's get... yeah, and actually all the elements that are purple inside my preview here are polygons that aren't currently associated with the material. So let me see if I can go back. Nope, can't go back, but that's okay. So we'll deal with some purple bits, which is just fine. And now let's import my object into the scene. Let's play our game. Everything looks a little bit big and purple. The door size is precisely the door size that I think I need to have. Yeah. I think I may have went a little bit too big. That curved doorway, I think, is throwing some of my asset off. So we'll change it back over in Modo here. We'll make it a little bit smaller in Modo to make it work with what we have here. But we're darn near close. We're darn near close. Now, the one thing that doesn't come with our project are the actual image maps that we're using inside of the materials itself. So let's just load those in. I'm going to create a folder here called textures. And here's the easiest way to load in a whole bunch of textures all at once. Just load them in and make sure you're copying them into your asset library. So here's all of them in. I'll hold down the Option key, and I'll copy them into my asset library. Same with all of these guys. I'll copy them in. There we go. And now, when I jump back into Unity, they'll load them in for me, which is nice. There they all are, and I can begin associating all of these individual patterns with the materials that were brought over from Modo. So chimney, let's do chimney was this one. There we go. Yay. Great. You see that texture showing up. Roof was, let's see, roof tiles goes there. Roof under, that one goes in there. Walls, I didn't do the walls, or I think I put the brick pattern in the walls. Let's do that. And wood beam ends was this one. Wood was that one. Great. Now we've reconnected all the materials and their textures back here in Unity. We have some lighting and some gamma correction issues that we need to manage, but overall, we're getting there. We're getting there. I'm starting to think that maybe some of these gamma issues are coming directly from Moto. And the new version of Moto, I think some of that open color I/O stuff is getting tagged onto our textures, because they certainly shouldn't be showing up that dark in Engine. We have some gamma issues. We have some big-time gamma issues. So let's explore this a little bit. We know that we have to adjust the size of my model back here in, back here in Moto. So let's just do that real fast. A little bit too big. A little bit smaller. That'll do. Yeah, now the top of my measuring stick is basically the top of the door. Let's try that. And let's use a different file now. And as just a reminder, I could definitely just export out that file again. And if I keep it the same name and I place it in, if I replace it inside of my asset directory, so if I overwrite my forge inside of my asset directory, it'll reload it. You got it. Let's go back into Unity, and boom, you can see that now it's a little bit smaller. And we're probably at the scale that we want it to be. Yeah, this is a little bit better. Yeah, now my door is pretty much the same height as I had it over inside of Moto, or very close to it. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And I can jump. Yeah, character to like jump and hit their head on the top of the door jamb. That's a bad day, you know. All right. Okay. So let's see if we can fix why our textures are so dark. It's not the directional light that's causing the darkness. Well, let's make sure it's not the directional light. Yeah, the intensity, let's put it at 1. Let me turn those on real fast. There we go. Strength of our shadows. FYI, here's a great visual as to why you don't want your shadow strength set to 1. Look how dark it is on the inside. It just doesn't look real at all. Okay, I like to turn my shadow strength down a little bit. Of course, we're not like saying like that, but maybe by half. And now we're still getting the all-important idea that there's some shadows being cast on our object, rock and roll. But now it doesn't look nearly as dark as muddy, and we're continuing to break up our object with some interesting tonal values. Okay, but let's see what's going on here. Let's go back over into Moto, and I think this time I want to export out my selected layer as an FBX. Let's do that. Just layers. This is going to be forge.fbx. I'm going to save this to my desktop just temporarily. Great. Okay. What? I don't believe you can. Let's import this element in. There it is. All right. This is what I love about the FBX. It actually tries to bring in some textures, and it's not actually bringing in the textures. What it's doing is understanding. It has found the texture in the exact same location as it has over in Moto. Oops. Sorry, didn't mean to click off of it. And let's put this in and see what we get. Now, its materials, we probably have double materials now, and we do. I should have deleted all these materials before I got started, but that's okay. Yeah, they are pretty dark. So I'm wondering what's going on here, because if you look at the original material, yeah, that looks good here. But on the actual material itself, oh, you know what? This is not, yeah, okay. This is a Moto thing. This is a Moto thing. And I always forget that Moto's now doing this, okay? If you look at the actual material color, that thing right there, they made it darker. It used to be pure white. Well, that one's pure white. And I may be doing the wrong one. Some of these, the ones that came from, let's see. Well, actually, I take that back. Take that back. Their diffuse color values are all white. Why are they exporting out as dark gray? Because here's what we need to change. In order to get, see how it's much, much darker? Look at the color that's coming in. It's basically a middle gray. It's 50% gray. If I made it white, now it's going to take the default color of the image map. You're basically tinting it. So luckily, the solution's real easy. Just make them all white. And now all my colors will come back. Well, it's part Unity and part Moto. For whatever reason, Unity is interpreting the color material value incorrectly over here. It should be white. It's interpreting it as middle gray. Yeah, so it's probably an export feature that's, well, it's an I/O feature, as they say. It's an I/O feature. Now we're talking. Now we're talking. Now everything looks the way it's supposed to look. Da-da-da-da. And that's a pretty good looking building, you know, for the most part. Yeah, for sure. How dare I? I certainly did. This is the great thing about working inside of Unity. It really is. I could very quickly go find my wood beams. Yeah, I put the wrong one on here. It's supposed to be that one. Boop. It all updates. Actually, I think that was the one that I hated. Let's put that one on there. And it all updates. Okay. However, there's a couple of these materials that we changed their tiling value on, and I've already forgotten which one it was. Let's see. Was it this one? Which one was it? It was the brick. Roof inside. We changed the horizontal and vertical wrap. So roof under. Let's change it to 1.6 to 1.6. Okay. And now we should have an accurate reproduction. I may have done it on the wrong one. No, that's it. I think that's it. Fantastic. Rock and roll. Good job. All right. Let's see. Cool. Coolio. Things are looking good. Things are looking really good. I'm very pleased with the result that we have. So this is the process that we need to go through as we're going into all of this. Oh, one other thing. I started down this path earlier. I want to delete the FBX version since we discovered the material issue on the Collada one. Earlier I mentioned that how it's going to name it is based on this value. And if you do from models material, let's see how it changes it. And luckily, in this particular situation, it didn't really change it. In certain situations, it's going to adopt the name of the texture map that's inside the material. Okay? So you got to be careful with it. You got to be really careful with it. Pay real close attention to how Unity is treating the names of all your materials before you go too much further. In addition, it looks like they've also given us a feature to go out and search for all of your materials and textures, which is kind of nice. Do project-wide. Yeah, great. That's great. Cool. It gives you a nice little description down here as to what it's doing. Unity will look for it in the local materials folder. If it doesn't exist, a new one is created at the local material folder. Recursive up, it will do a recursive up search for in all the materials up to the asset folder. So it's not going to look inside the asset folder. And then on project wide, it's going to go through everything, anywhere inside. It's going to look for this material anywhere inside the entire file, which is why I imported in the FBX. Certain materials were duplicated, but not all of them were duplicated, right? It only duplicated the ones that had a second word in there, because the FBX file interpreted that space in the material name a little bit differently. The Collada one put an underscore on it, and the FBX version of this project file separated them out with a space. Unity is seeing those two as different materials because they're, the character set of each one of those materials' names is different now. That's kind of neat. That's a nice little addition. That's a bonus. They just started doing that in the most recent version. It didn't used to be like this. So they're getting better at it. Woo! Rock and roll. Pretty fantastic. All right, questions about how we're going to be working with our texture sets and creating these tiny textures inside of Unity. Clear as mud? A little bit? Okay. So as you're going through the UVing stage, put a checker on there. Put a checker pattern on the UVs so that when you're UVing it, when you're physically creating the UVs, you can, create the appropriate scale so that when you put that tiny texture on there with the material, everything is all dialed and ready to go. Okay? The material is now driving the placement of these textures. So we have to start breaking our model down into its component pieces, kind of like how I have here. Pretty neat, huh? And what this also makes, and what this also does for us, since the material is now the driver, is that I can have a whole bunch of buildings, for example, that all use the exact same brick pattern. I can have a whole bunch of separate objects that all use the exact same wood grain pattern, and life is good, right? It reduces the number of individual textures that we have on our global game, especially for environments. It's pretty cool. Case in point, let me show you what I'm talking about. If I created, like, I don't know, a cylinder. Here's my cylinder, right? Make it pretty big. That's really big. Okay. Now, maybe I want my cylinder to adopt the exact same brick pattern that's on the walls of my house. Well, I just go grab that material, apply it to my cylinder, bam, life is good, okay? A material-centric workflow is what we're adopting here. It's no longer completely reliant on those custom textures that we created in Photoshop. Those still have their place, don't get me wrong, but tiling textures also have their place. Questions? Yeah, questions? Probably not, yeah. For smaller things, like props, weapons, swords, things like that, the Photoshop texturing pipeline is going to give you the best result, right? Yeah, I'd only use tiny textures on big things like buildings.
Yeah, you notice, like, if you ever pay attention to the artwork in the game, you'll notice, like, things that aren't, like, part of the plot will be tile textured, and then, like, the main items, like the character has, they're all special textures.
Yeah, you got it. They're unique. Custom, for sure. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't make certain areas of our geometry custom. I could go in and put posters and stuff on there after the fact, okay? I'll work with you guys on that in the upcoming weeks. Because we still want to go in and add, environmental effects and things like that. We'll continue talking about how we can do stencil effects on our geometry to get the illusion of dirt and grime in specific places on our mesh. It's pretty great, actually. It's pretty neat. Tiling textures are the base, if you will, for all the objects that we're going to be, creating for our games. Yeah?
Oh, and then in there, is there a way to add in a normal mesh?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we discussed last week, changing our shader type will expose additional channels that we can add image maps into. The diffuse shader type is just going to give us a single image well for the diffuse image map. But if we went to like bump diffuse, now we have another section here for a normal map. Which, hold on, I think it was the chimney one. Let's go find the chimney. I'll do it. Let's do bump diffuse. I'll throw in the normal map that I made in Photoshop. Go take a look at it. Yeah, now we can see it looks a little bit more glossy. We're starting to get the illusion of that specular highlight cruising down my chimney bricks. And as a continual illustration of why it's important that we do this, let me go grab my directional light and I'll rotate it. Now all of my shadows are updated. This is not a good normal map. The one that I created in Photoshop is not exactly perfect, but you can see that all those shadows are being updated on the fly. Look at that. That's kind of odd, isn't it? Yeah. It didn't do a great job of making a normal map in Photoshop, but that's the illusion that we're after. We want to be able to go in and adjust our lighting and have all the shadow information on the local texture update and change to. Okay, questions? Yeah.
We're going to be turning in a project file. You want a Unity project?
Yeah, so great question. For our homework this week, what you're going to be turning in and submitting is your Unity project directory. So for me, I created a project directory called Demo. In every sense, the contents of this folder represent the entirety of my game, okay? So when you're finished with this week's assignment and you get this project file into Unity, as I just have, I just want you to compress it into a zipped archive, okay? There it is. Submit that to the Dropbox on D2L. Unfortunately, D2L can't accept a folder. It only accepts files. So by getting our folder structure into a file, we can submit it without too many issues. Well, all that stuff should be in your assets directory, right? Or you should have copies of all the textures in your asset directory. At the end of the day, you should just be able to zip up that one folder and you're on your way. Yeah, a portfolio render, that'd be very helpful. That'd be great, of your final finished thing. Questions? All right, everyone. Yep. Give me an LXO file. Actually, let's look at the assignment sheet. I'm starting to think that maybe I forgot to add something in there. All right. Yeah, I forgot the Unity stuff. So yeah, I want to see this in Unity. That's really the end result of all this, okay? So I'll add that to the list of expectations here in a minute. I want you to do all your UV mapping, texture, and get this over into Unity and reapply all of those textures to your materials and make it work in Engine. Okay? Yeah, should be pretty fun. Questions? All right. Well, we got about 10 minutes left in class. I'll leave you guys to start working on it. You got it. Yeah, and that's a really good point to bring up. I have a lot of elements in the Dropbox, a lot of assignments that I have not issued yet. Some of the due dates are off. I shuffle things around as I go through the semester. So basically use the content section of the course to determine what's due. All of the due dates here are correct. So don't worry about that other stuff. I really wish it wouldn't do that because it kind of takes away a certain degree of flexibility on my part. Yeah, don't worry about that. If it doesn't show up in the content, don't worry about it yet. Like we were going to do the importing an asset thing today, but I'm going to do that next week, I think. So yeah. Yep. Yeah, if it doesn't show up in the content area, if we haven't talked about it in the content area, don't worry about it. Let me bang my head against D2L for telling you guys things that I haven't even issued yet. Yeah. It's in some regards, I get punished by kind of like pre-baking all this stuff at the beginning of the semester, because if I stray from the plan ever so slightly, it still is communicated to you as though it's due. Yeah. Use the content section as our guide. All right, questions? See you guys next week.